I have a special guest with me. Richard Gunther is a digital experience consultant. He will share with us his advice and opinions on what makes a good or bad user experience. Stick around and find out who are the good, the bad, and the ugly of smart home apps. So let's talk about what makes an app user interface good or bad.
Thank you for having me on to talk about this. This is something I'm really passionate about, and you can find the complete gamut of products out there, from really, really good experiences to really, really bad experiences. But I want to talk about things that I think would be good attributes of a good smart home software product. So if you have an app and it's designed to control your devices or add your devices or whatever it is that you're expected to do with that app, one of my first rules is that the number one thing that people are going to do with the app should be front and center. You shouldn't have to go find it. You shouldn't have to switch tabs. You shouldn't have to dig into lower level screens. You should be able to get to that one thing. So, Robert, if you have an app that's designed to control your lights, wouldn't you expect the controls for that light to be right there on that first screen?
Absolutely.
And this is something that I think a lot of manufacturers forget about. They have so many features in their applications that they end up having to kind of create layers of functionality and sometimes end up burying some of this stuff. So that's rule number one. You know, it's kind of like when you go to your bank app, what's the first thing that you want to do? You want to see what your balance is and then do stuff from there. But, you know, banks haven't even learned this lesson yet.
I've seen many apps that they work okay, but they're visually very pedestrian. Do apps need to be pretty to be good, or can an app be plain Jane and just okay looking, but actually be a much better app?
This is actually a great entry into my next point about good experiences. Something that I try to be really clear about with my clients is that user experience is not graphic design. These are related and they can influence each other, but they shouldn't be thought of as the same thing. So, you know, you might think of an app as being pretty or not pretty. May have nothing to do with how well it works. Does it actually let you accomplish your goals when you're using that app? I am not at all opposed to an app that doesn't look significantly different from the phone's settings screen, as long as it does what it needs to do well and helps my customer reinforce their brand. Like, that's the other thing that I think is important here without getting obnoxious about it. You want people to know that you're in your app, not in the settings screen. But I think that you can let design get in the way of making something very functional as well. So it's a two-way street. When I talk about how you would design an app, I think that the content, the design, and the workflows in that app need to be clean and current and clear and consistent. A lot of C's there. But the point is, you want to have as little information and as little clutter in that app as possible to make it easy for people to use. You want it to be clear how the app is used. So keep it so that people aren't having to guess at stuff. Don't use jargon. Don't use pretty icons that nobody's seen before, but they're cool because your designer made them. Stick with stuff that people are going to understand, and then be consistent. Make sure that not only does your app make sense and work the same way within itself, but that it follows like the standards for how people expect something to work. If you're going to redesign what a switch looks like to turn on or turn off. It either needs to be really obvious and there needs to be a good reason that you're doing something different from what the industry standard is for that. And both iOS and Android have standards for what a simple switch should look like, or have, stick with what's there, or have a really good reason for violating that standard. Let's say that you want to be able to dim something. Okay, well, now we need a different type of thing. The Apple Home app is a really good example of a new way of looking at how to dim something that has become a standard. Almost everybody now uses this long gliding ridge that you can slide up and down on to operate as a dimmer. So keeping things so that they're as easy and obvious as possible is really, really critical.
So in terms of actual specific apps, what are a few real examples? Let's name some names of good apps, bad apps, or just okay apps in the smart home space.
I mentioned the Home app from Apple. I think that when Apple came out with the Home app, it was very, very basic, but they built upon that and created something that personally I think is ideal on the iPad platform. I think their wide format, larger screen version of that app is an ideal kind of console for managing the stuff in your home. It gives you nice navigation on the left-hand side to jump between different device types or rooms. And then on the right-hand side, a big canvas where you can see your scenes and your devices and just have a nice, easy way to interact with stuff. I think, though, that in iOS 16, they diverged from their initial design for that in the iOS version, in the version that you have on your phone. And I'm not a big fan of how they redesigned the phone version of Home. They ended up kind of putting everything on one big screen. And if you have, say, 15 rooms in your home, and you want to get to the one that's, 2/3 of the way down the list, actually trying to accurately navigate to that room is now much harder than it used to be in the old version of that app. And, that gets to another one of my things that makes a good app. It needs to be able to scale. It should work easily if you have 3 devices or if you have 123 devices. So I think Apple Home is in the good to okay category, depending on which ones you look at. I think the Google Home app has also gotten better for basic control. The newest version of the Google Home app is pretty easy and pretty simple to understand. Now, you could argue that it's a little bit too easy. It hides everything that isn't just basic on and off and stuff like that, basic dimming. And so that may frustrate advanced users a little bit. And when you start digging into that for those advanced features, they're either non-existent there or they're so hidden and hard to get to that can be a little bit frustrating. So that's another one that kind of teeters on that good to just okay range. A simple indie app that I absolutely love, the HomeCam for HomeKit app, is an independent app written by Aaron Pierce. He has a whole series of HomeKit specific apps, and they're so simple and they look like they just absolutely belong on your iPhone. He designed specifically for the iPhone platform, and that gives him the ability to really tailor it to that look and feel of a nice, well-fit iOS app, and he does a fantastic job with those on every platform. In the okay category, SmartThings is okay. Sometimes I love it. Sometimes I don't like it at all. So it kind of depends on what I'm trying to get to in there. I think the Philips Hue app is okay. It's been getting better. It used to be terrible, and now it's much, much better as they realize that you don't really want to have to dig through 7 different screens to be able to set the default on behavior for a light. I mean, they just had stuff split out all over the place before. I think the Nest app, which will probably eventually go away, is, again, okay. The Ring app, I'm using these big names because I think these are the apps that people are familiar with. The Ring app seems like just an enormous waste of prime real estate instead really focusing on promoting products at Amazon and trying to draw your attention to their latest new features that you probably don't care about. So there's a lot of lost opportunity in that app, I think. Insteon, within the last 2 years or so, completely redesigned their app. Their old app was really pretty terrible, and their new app is good. It's not great. It could use some improvements. I think I've been clear in stuff that I've done in the past that the company that created Insteon Smart Labs had previously been a client of mine. And I hold nothing back when I talk to folks about what I do and don't like about their stuff. So this isn't any surprise to anybody.
Okay, so you mentioned some good apps, some okay apps, very well-known app. What about a bad app? What's your prime example or examples of some really bad apps that people probably are stuck using?
At the top of my list there is Amazon's app for their assistant. I won't say her name, but wow, that app has started out in the most basic form. They redesigned it a number of times. Each time they redesign it, it gets more heavily encumbered with features and no easier to use. And it breaks one of my rules that I just mentioned earlier. This app still does not scale. When you use an assistant like Amazon's or Google's or Apple's, you're aggregating all the different devices that you have across your different ecosystems. So if anything needs to be able to scale, something that they're making absolutely does, because it's going to be supporting many more devices than any of these individual manufacturers' apps. And I remember when I was trying to make a point about this in I guess I would call it a support ticket with Amazon, I tried to do a screen capture of the list of my devices that it maintained and how hard it was for me to navigate that list. And the list was so long that I couldn't even capture the full scrolling list in all of the different screens that I scrolled through as one image, because it was going to be too large vertically of an image to actually save. It's just ridiculous. So, this is something that people, that these different companies absolutely need to be thinking about. Another app that I think is just too complicated and has terrible workflows, even though it's probably the most powerful manufacturer's HomeKit app out there right now, is the Eve app. If you can't get something done in HomeKit through Home or through one of the other manufacturers' apps, Eve is the go-to free manufacturer app that'll let you control your other devices that are on your HomeKit system, because it gives you access to nearly every attribute that those devices would allow you to manipulate. But it's so complicated how they have the devices arranged and organized and categorized, and it presents things in a way that just, I don't think, aligns with how normal customers, normal homeowners who are trying to get into this stuff would actually think. And then I was just going to mention a couple others. IFTTT or IFT is an app that's incredibly powerful, but it's mired in its own jargon and custom icons and Instead of search, they have an explore section, and instead of new for creating a new automation, or I think they call them applets, which in itself is a confusing point. There's an add capability, and what are you adding? Are you adding a device? Are you adding I think they could continue to work on that to improve that. And then just a blanket statement here. Nearly every appliance manufacturer's app that I've used is just terrible. Whether it's your high-end appliances like Decor or Thermador or something like that, or even the more simple ones that get integrated into the Samsung SmartThings app these days, most of those appliance apps are just awful.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I have a client that has Sub-Zero refrigerators and freezers, and some of it's a nightmare to just even get it working. And you set it up and then you never use it again because it's so painful. Question, do you think in general, most device manufacturers still view software as a necessary evil and they do a minimal effort, or they don't put the right focus on it?
I think that's going to depend on the company and probably the size of the company in addition to that. So, whether your app supports hardware or not, software development and maintenance needs to be an ongoing process of continuous improvement. And most companies building apps, let alone apps for hardware, don't think that way. Most companies don't budget for this properly, and you end up with companies, particularly those that are supporting hardware, that just drop something on people and then move on to the next shiny thing and forget about the product that's out there. And for good or not, consumers have come to expect that a software-supported piece of hardware is going to get better over time, not get stale, not get forgotten, but is actually going to improve over time because it can, because it's driven by software, and the software could add capabilities or features. And particularly in the case of small hardware companies, a lot of hardware companies either start out or end up with just a person or two working on the app because most of their resources are going toward the next thing or toward the hardware itself. So yeah, when you have this, set of limited resources, particularly in smaller companies, I think you are going to see the software suffer. And it's in the larger companies where they have the resources and they have a little more experience with this that they can spend more time on the app and put more time into it. Now, that doesn't mean they're approaching it right. It doesn't mean that they're doing the right thing, and it doesn't mean that they're going to, give it the proper care and feeding it needs. I think my number one issue that I see with companies that I've worked with are that they just don't have the budget after that initial release. The business has this belief that once you get it out there, then you just update it when you have to, or gradually over time. And I would argue that you should be looking at a budget for maybe 50% of what that initial build was, just continually for every year going forward, as long as that's out there.
Yeah, it takes a real investment to have good software and great apps. In the early days, there was a huge focus on written documentation and user manuals. Is there a philosophical reason to have a user manual, or does it matter anymore that some companies simply link to a video or a YouTube as an introduction to their product? What's the pro and con there?
I'm not a fan of go look at this video to do anything, frankly. I like videos for informational purposes, like what we're doing right now. I want to hear what people in the industry think. I want to see what people are doing. I don't want to have to find the point in even a 5-minute video of where's that thing I need to set or where's that feature I'm looking for. there are much more efficient ways of doing that. Now, does it have to be a manual? Realistically, I don't know. Robert, when's the last time that you actually opened a physical paper manual for a product that you purchased? It's probably been a really long time. So I think what is more common now is a number of alternative ways of getting that information to people. Now, this requires that you're still writing, that you still have people on your staff who can write good copy, good ways of explaining things, maybe not necessarily technical writing, but they have the skill to interpret the technology in a way that your customers are going to understand and then deploy it in the appropriate channel. So maybe it's in the app itself. Maybe there's contextual help in various places in the app, either directly under a control or maybe in a little info icon that you can pull up, or maybe in a help screen that you can jump to if you need more detailed information. It might be in print, but more likely it might be online in help documents or support articles. And I mean, I've worked with clients with support sites that also end up kind of becoming a junk drawer, because anytime somebody has a problem, someone on the tech team might write up, okay, here's how you fix that. And then you have the community participating and adding their stuff. And if you just search on some keyword, you may end up with 52 articles, and only one of them is the one that answers your question about how to use that feature. So well-written and well-organized online support documentation, I think, can take the place of what you and I would traditionally have known as a user manual in days past.
That's a really good point. I know that I have gone to the forums or the self-help areas of some manufacturers, and junk drawer is appropriate. I get so many hits, I give up. Then I go to Google and I get so frustrated because all that comes up are videos. I just want a quick, how do I change this setting? Or how do I do this or that? And all I get is a list of 20 videos. But I will admit that sometimes they point you right to the timestamp in the video that will answer that question. But it's so frustrating to find help when you want it.
Exactly. And that is helpful that they can direct you to a specific location in a video. But really, is that what you need? If you're asking, how do I reset this light bulb? Do you need to watch someone do it? No, that's getting them advertising revenue, goody for them. But what you need is a simple sentence that tells you the answer to how do I reset this, and takes you through probably just 2 steps to do it, right?
Jumping to another topic that I think is quite interesting, there's a trend now for these massive ecosystems, whether it's Apple Home, Google Home, SmartThings, and now Matter, where they're trying to, in effect, design out the application-specific apps from the manufacturer. You're using products through a common framework. Unfortunately, it tends to be a minimum functionality definition across the board. Matter is especially guilty of that right now. What do you feel? Is that a step in the wrong direction? Is that a necessary minimum, but we should have better apps to access the unique and special features of the products are still going to be required?
I think it's going to depend if you have a commoditized product or a specialized product. If you take as an example a simple colored light bulb, and the only thing that colored light bulb is going to do is dim, go on and off, and change color. There's no reason, unless they're, as a manufacturer, offering special effects or things like that that you could do, that you really need to dive into that manufacturer's app. Those are the types of things that I think Apple Home, Google Home, and other ecosystems like that can do a great job with, and just make them, all available regardless of the manufacturer. That's the intent, is to just put everything in one place and make it easy for customers. But as an example, use the nanoleaf lines behind me right now. This is a product that has all kinds of capabilities. Like I can have effects, I can have colors change in them, I can even have it adjust to audio and things like that. Well, I can't do that from one of these ecosystems, right? To do that, I have to use their app. So in those cases, I think that's where it's really important for the manufacturers to focus on making their unique features easy and accessible to customers and give customers a reason to want to use your app for stuff like that.
In the traditional home automation systems, the one app to rule them all has been the holy grail. The selling point of a lot of these systems, Crestron, Savant, Control4, has been that they have a single integrated experience from, if they do have an app, it's their app, it runs everything. They typically have hardware controllers, whether they're touchscreen remotes for the TV and other devices or proprietary touchpads on the wall, or for a while they were using iPads. Is that a selling point, or is that a restriction or limitation with the proliferation of so many devices now in the smart home?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the consumer wants. You give the example of the high-end installed systems. Those pro systems, sure, it's one app or one panel to rule everything, but even those are limited. Those are limited by what the installer and the homeowner sit down and decide is important for that home. That panel is not going to let the homeowner dive in and randomly pick some feature of, again, I'll use my color changing effect light bulbs, just assign anything to those light bulbs the same way that a manufacturer's own app would. It is being curated at the specific or to the specific needs of the homeowner. And I think that is what these aggregation apps and these home apps from Apple and Google and others are trying to do, but they don't have that advantage of customizing it for you so much, right? Like if you want to get to a scene that is going to trigger party mode or something like that, you have to go in and you have to set that up and make that all happen yourself. Is it the holy grail? I don't know. Robert, you know I'm really into keypads. This is a simple example of whether people want that hand-picked, curated, predefined experience or whether they just want to use things randomly. And I think it depends on the person. I have keypads all over my house that control different things. And I have a mix. Some of them just literally turn specific light bulbs on or off. And others are set with these scenes that do complex things like turn every light on for cleaning purposes or set up the house for going to bed and things like that. So it gives you a well-designed aggregation app like the Apple Home app gives you the ability to have both of those. And I think that's good. I don't think those are going to go away. But at the same time, for power users, for more technically capable users, people who want to dive in more like you and I might want to do, well, those manufacturer apps are still going to play an important role.
Yes, I agree. There's room for many different types of controls. And I'm also a big fan of physical and tactile controls, especially in mixed households where some people are not technical. And even if they all are, you have guests, you have visitors, they need to walk in a room and just be able to turn on a light and not have to read a little cheat sheet by the nightstand on how the room operates. I think the best learning example really is hotels, because if you look at how they're adding automation systems and lights and shades, and you walk in, Every time there's a new user coming into that environment, they have to be able to just intuitively understand what to do. I'd like to see more of that mimicked in a layer of basic use for smart home. I'm not saying the advanced modes aren't there, but let's layer it and just structure it in an onion structure. So the more you need, the deeper you go, but the basics are obvious rather than cryptic.
I agree.
Let me touch on one more area, web interfaces. In the past, a lot of technical products, network equipment, the big advantage was moving from a command line cryptic typing at the keyboard to a web interface. The advantage of being visual, but also being accessible from any kind of device from anywhere. In the last few years, we're seeing more and more smart home products only provide an app and no web or other interface. Do you think that's a good or a bad thing?
Personally, I don't like it. I understand why this happens. Apps are going to be the first way that a manufacturer is going to want to allow people to control their devices, because that's where they're going to get the most customers using it, right? Most customers are going to want to use something on their phone. We see time and time again, companies experiment with, oh, you don't need an app. You can just go to our web thing and use that. And it just doesn't get the same conversion rate that companies who are releasing apps have. That's one of the reasons why we have an app for everything now. Every company, even if it doesn't have a product, has an app. So you can go look at their stuff in their app when there's no need for them to have an app, because apps are popular and everybody wants to have an app. That's where their development resources go. So you have limited development resources. You're going to put them where the people are. Now, I don't know how you operate in your day-to-day when you're working and you're managing your business, not out at somebody's home, but actually back home managing your business and planning. But I'm sitting at a desktop computer or a laptop computer, and I have a big screen in front of me, and nothing frustrates me more when the doorbell rings or something happens in the home that needs my attention, and I have to take my attention away from my desktop and my big screen in front of me and find the device that has that alert coming or that it needs my attention. Why can't I do that right on my computer? Now, there are two things going on there. One, companies are starting to use technologies to build their apps that make it easier for them to now maybe make that same app available on the desktop for people. So that's good. No matter whether it's Windows or whether it's a Mac, if they're using one of these cross-platform app development toolkits, they could always create a version that would work on your desktop too. And we're starting to see companies do that. That's great. But another thing is that Apple on the Mac ecosystem has more or less solved this problem with their new hardware by allowing you to load an iOS app or an iPadOS app that's been properly compiled and run it right on your desktop, which is fantastic. So that solves that problem a little bit. And widgets and other things that Apple's doing really help solve that problem. So I don't like that we're getting away from desktop-based control for things and access to configuring a particular configuration where you're going through a bunch of stuff, and the bigger the screen you have, the better. But I think we're getting back to that, maybe not necessarily the way we had it before, but in a way that is still very useful.
I would agree. I like to see all kinds of interfaces, and I think the web interface is really lacking. Now, Apple's interesting, although I would still want a real web browser interface. It's much more flexible and versatile. I could use it from any device, not just an Apple. The widgets are nice. They're helpful for solving the big screen issue. For me, I like to work on the largest screen possible. So I prefer iPad in the field if it's an iOS app-only system, or a web browser is ideal because I can use a much larger screen. I've actually run into the reverse where one manufacturer developed a nice web application, but they're using a PWA, a progressive web app technology, to make it available on smartphones. And I just hate it. It doesn't have the feel. It doesn't have the performance. It's clunky. It's like first generation banking apps are worse, because I actually complained to them. They need a native app, and they went and built this PWA, and that was their answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, right? The technologies that let you build for one platform let you, depending on how you look at it, economize or be lazy. And, it's not to suggest that companies are trying to shirk on getting stuff in front of their customers, but with limited resources, if this is the best that you can do and you can't put more resources onto that because maybe you don't have an actual app developer, or you don't have somebody who's familiar with the way that an iOS app or an Android app would work and know how to build one that looks and works like that, well, that would be expensive to hire someone like that. So if you have something from the web and you can make it available just by packaging it up and throwing an icon on someone's desktop, it's better than nothing, right? It's better than not having an app, but it would probably end up in my bad column.
Thank you so much for watching this video. You are awesome. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more, toggle the subscribe button, automate the bell icon, and then get started on your next smart home project. Well, that leads me to, it's a little bit off topic, but I think it's germane, the issue of manufacturers that don't want to trust their users. Let me give you an example. I'm a Eero Pro certified installer, and I have access to a web interface for Eero systems. Now, compared to true high-end networking gear and more professional equipment that I use, it's pretty minimal, but it does give visibility into a network and allow some control over configuration and settings of Eeros. And it even draws a visual map showing you the interconnection between the Eeros and the signal strength and the traffic activity. It would be a great tool for consumers, yet Eero believes it's a dealer-only product and won't let even prosumers or power users even know it exists. And I feel that's a great disadvantage.
It's funny, there's a fine line between protecting your customers from breaking something, from making their network not work, and actually giving them the ability to make their network better, to implement features or settings that would allow them to have a better experience overall. And I understand that that's a little bit of a trade-off, but it's funny that you use Eero as an example, because I, for a short period of time, had tried the Eero 6E Pro solution in my own home, and it didn't work as well as what I had been used to. I have the Unify system now, and I'm pretty happy with that. But when I was using their system, my biggest complaint about it was that the consumer app was virtually useless to me. And Robert, you'll know, as a Unify customer, I have access to see everything in there, to be able to tweak things. And going down to an interface that was so dumbed down that it couldn't even properly show me whether a device was actually physically connected to Ethernet or just connected to wireless and bridged through something that was connected to Ethernet. It didn't let me, it represented everything as if it was wireless, even if it was physically connected. And now that's ridiculous. And I should be able to dive into the details to find out more about that, but you can't. They just figure that, nope, that's all you need to know. So in the case of Eero, I would argue that they've gone too far, and they could and probably should add something of an advanced capability to their app. But they need to do that in a way that is behind the simple interface for the 80% of the users they're going to have that only need and only care about that simple stuff.
I would totally agree. If you look at Apple, Google, Amazon, they could provide a lot more useful advanced troubleshooting and diagnostics or status and hide it or layer it so the average quick user doesn't run into it. My personal pet peeve with Apple, and one of the reasons why I don't see it viable for any professional installation, is it's a bit of arrogance, but they believe everything just works. So when it doesn't, they don't give you any visibility into anything, even if it's not their products, especially when it comes to networking, since Apple discontinued their Airport Express and Airport Wi-Fi systems. If you have a networking issue, you don't get any information. Are they unable to see the device? Are they getting errors communicating? I just feel they need to eat some humble pie and make that available, not as a diagnostic log when you call support and after waiting for hours on the phone, but to normal troubleshooters or advanced users.
Yeah, I can see the frustration there. And Apple's a great example. They do not just hide, but eliminate any of the details behind these devices and how they're operating. I was pleased to see that they're adding not so much logging, but a history of information for when security devices like doors and garage doors and locks and stuff like that are triggered, so that you can start looking at stuff like that. Now, they're doing that more as a know who's been in and out of your home type of thing, but that demonstrates that that capability is there. There are tools that you could use for HomeKit that would give you insight into all the traffic that is going on. And I know we've talked about different independent apps. The controller app for HomeKit has very good logging that tracks every command that's been sent, every piece of data that's been sent, and that can be really useful for troubleshooting. But you're right, Apple just figures, oh, you don't need that.
Well, troubleshooting and diagnosing is a whole area unto itself. And I feel the manufacturer is in the best position to filter and handle the semantics of the information. If you can give one or two suggestions or points of advice to the major manufacturers to improve their apps and the app experience, what would you tell them?
So I'm going to cheat in answering this question a little bit. I have one very specific to smart home. If you're developing an app that supports a product, a physical product, you need to understand that your app is as much a product of your company as that smart widget you're selling. And it needs to be managed as such. If you have a product manager who is coordinating and organizing and directing the roadmap for a product, someone should be doing the same thing for your software. It's that important. It's not just another thing, another piece. So that I think is my biggest piece of advice. When you have hardware and software that have to work together, you have to treat them both as product. It's not just a little side project. Now, there's also, and here's where I'm cheating, 3 things that I think that every software manufacturer should be doing. And this absolutely applies to smart home app developers. Don't reinvent the wheel. If there's stuff out there that makes sense, don't come up with a new switch if there's no good reason for it. Don't don't waste a lot of design effort and time and dollars coming up with a really intricate, cool design for stuff that's just there that you can already take advantage of. You're just wasting money. Put the money into features and reinforcing your brand and the value that this product delivers to the customers. Another one is eat your own dog food. Every single person in your company should be using your app. Everyone. Not just the developer, not just the tester, the CEO, the executives, the people who are on the whole product team. Everybody should be using this app, ensuring that they're experiencing what the consumers are experiencing. Some of the best apps that I've used are better because I know that everybody in the company just is all in. Everybody has their own experiences and they bring that to improve the app. And then thinking of that as well, don't pave your roadmap for your product from the feedback of every single person. In other words, you're going to get a lot of feedback from customers. Some of it is good, some of it is bad. You're going to get feedback from those employees using the app. Some of that is going to be good and some of that is going to be bad. And some of it's going to be very specific. And a development team without good product management is going to want to just put all of those things in a list and say, okay, these are the things we're going to do. What you should be looking for is the patterns. You should be seeing, oh, well, we have, it looks like 20% of these have to do with how complicated it is to add a device to the system. So that's where we should dedicate some resources and really focus on the biggest bang, the largest group of customers that you're going to satisfy and improve the experience of, and not worry about the one-offs for, wow, I wish this button were bigger, or I don't like blue, or could you add this feature that nobody else has asked for? So really evaluate the input that you're getting, even if it's internal, and focus on those things that are going to have the biggest impact.
Sounds good. Very helpful. Well, thank you, Richard, for your time and insight. Really thoughtful and good information. How can people get in touch with you if they want to follow up with you directly?
All right. Well, two ways. I kind of come from two different angles when I'm looking at this. One is as a podcaster myself and a host of a couple of shows. You can reach me at the Digital Media Zone, and I'm Richard at thedigitalmediazone.com. Additionally, I'm a digital experience consultant, and this is what I do. I help companies make their apps suck less and help them figure out how to improve their customers' experiences with their digital products. And for that, you can reach out to me at richard@richardgunther.com.
Speaking about smart home apps, one of my favorites isn't the prettiest or the ugliest, but it sure is useful. It makes setting up remote access to your smart home devices really simple from anywhere in the world. Watch this video next and see how easy it can be.